You're listening to Halfway There, episode number 202, Erik Fisher and the Productive Life. Hey, let's do some stuff. Friends, welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. I'm your host, Erik Nevins. Thank you so much for being here. If you're a regular listener to the show and you want to help us keep going, feel free to always stop in at Patreon, patreon.com/halfway there. To support the show, you can get episodes early. You can get, swag, things like that. I would love to have you there. Hey, our guest today, I'm so excited about this because he's one of the podcasters I listen to, and I think you guys will really connect with him. Can't wait to have this conversation. He is a productivity podcaster. He also, his show is called Beyond the To-Do List. You can find him at beyondthetodolist.com. He's also the director of social media education at Agorapulse, so we'll have to talk about that. I was just checking that out. And so this is great. I'm excited to have Erik Fisher on the show. Erik, welcome to Halfway There.
Thanks for having me.
That is fantastic. Like I was telling you earlier, you're one of the shows that I used to listen to. So when I was stuck in my cube, hating my life, you were helpful. So thanks for that. Hey, I really want to hear a little bit about you and kind of where God has you right now. Tell us about that, and maybe even Agorapulse. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, where I'm at right now is in an extremely thankful place. I have a job. I have a pretty secure job, and I have, I may be stuck here, quote, stuck here.
Yeah.
Quotes, with my wife and my two kids, but at least I have them, and everybody's healthy, and, as stressful as that can be to be all stuck together and whatever, we're making it work. And, but yeah, and I mentioned, again, the job is, I've been in the social media sphere now for, since 2007, 8, something like that. And that same timeline as like podcasting, really. Whether I was listening or co-hosting or guesting on shows, but then also going out on my own and doing my own. But what I'm doing now is I'm the director of social media education at Agorapulse, and Agorapulse is basically my favorite social media productivity tool. So a lot of people, the joke is a lot of people will say, wait, what's that? And it's like, well, have you heard of Hootsuite? Yeah, it's kind of like that. Oh, okay, cool. Except I've used Hootsuite before. And in fact, prior to even ever trying Agorapulse, in my old position at Social Media Examiner, I had already given up on Hootsuite because I just thought, this is clunky. This doesn't work. The service isn't there. And so, and I'm not paid to say any of that. That's literally my personal experience from that. And so then trying Agorapulse and being able to apply what most people call for their email inbox zero, that mentality of having no emails in your inbox, clearing your inbox out daily or as frequently as you can, being on top of that. It's your social media listening tool and inbox zero tool for all your social accounts. And so since it was such a headache eliminator for me during my day job, I kind of needed a break. I'd been a social media manager at Indiana Wesleyan University, and then also for 3 years, and then social media examiner for 5.5 years. And I just said, I need to do something different. But I didn't want to switch completely out of social because I like it, and I like the people in the industry. And so I happened to have a conversation, happened to start a longer conversation about what Agorapulse wanted and needed, and they needed somebody to start building some community and some training, not just for their customers, but for being a lead magnet and things like that.
Yeah.
And so I switched over with them back in November 2019. Been with them for about 6 months now almost, and it's been great. And I'm just thrilled, really just getting started, which is kind of the cool thing. It's like I've already feel like I've done a whole lot, and I've really just scratched the surface.
I love it. Very cool. Well, it looks really cool, and one of these days I'll get to where I can actually buy a service like that. it's I can imagine how much better it was. I can't imagine. You mentioned inbox zero. I'm not even going to tell you how many things are emails are in my inbox.
Oh, yeah.
We're just not going to talk about it. But we could use that. Okay, so that's interesting. We're going to talk about kind of your spiritual journey. I'd love to hear that. And I love that you said it a little bit earlier. This is something you don't get to talk about, so it'd be kind of cool. You're sort of known in the podcasting space as a podcaster, and you know the productivity stuff, but we don't always get a chance to talk about your faith. So let's do that.
Yeah. So, and there's some people in that space that know this extra dimension to me, I guess, or they're closer. There's the thing. It's like, if you're closer friends, if you're in a closer circle, you know this. It's further out, day in, day out. People that, listen to the show may or may not have picked up on that. People that interact with me on social may or may not know. But those that interact with me on a regular basis will know. Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's hear it. So, where did you grow up? Let's start there.
Yeah. So I grew up, I was born and raised in Rochester, New York. So right across the pond there from Canada and Toronto. And it's in between Buffalo, Syracuse, and near Niagara Falls.
Okay. So what was it like growing up there? What did spiritually for you?
Yeah, so this is where it gets, this is interesting to me. I'm trying to recount this myself. I grew up, I was born into what you would call a Christian family. My parents were both Christians. We went to an independent Christian church, so non-denominational, which I didn't realize was as unique as it was until later in life. So that was interesting. And it was
the denominational piece or the just Christian family?
You know what? Probably both. Now that I think about it, but more the independent church.
Yeah, gotcha.
Aspect of it.
Right.
And the reason that I didn't realize it was unique was because we, as an independent church, were also connected with other independent churches in the area, and we would do things with them, or even some of the ones because my father ran the local church softball league. And so he was the guy who was managing who would play who and where and when on what field and times and dates and everything, So we had this great network. And I had only later in life seen that really happen in a denomination itself, because later in life, which we'll get to, I was attending the Wesleyan church. And so I was part of a youth group, and then other youth groups and camps and things. And I was like, oh, this is weird. This is like it used to be back in the other thing I used to do. So that said, there's not a time in my life, though, that I can look back and say I wasn't, I guess, aware of God.
Yeah.
And there are times where it's like, it's a weird feeling for me, because it's not necessarily, where is he? Does he exist? Though, again, normal doubts.
Sure.
But I've always had this, I don't know, weird sense, or say weird, but it's probably not. Unique is probably a better way to describe it, because I know other people don't feel this or have this sense. I always have this sense that God is present.
Yeah.
I count that as something to be thankful for, because there are times where it's just like, okay, cool, that's there. But and not, and it's more when other people would have the instance of, is he or isn't he there, or where is he, or what is he doing? That's where I have the, I don't understand what you're doing moments.
Sure.
So I don't know if that really is as clarifying as I think it is, but anyway.
Well, that makes sense. So it sounds like you kind of grew up in a Christian family. You knew the Lord probably very early in your life. Don't remember a time when he wasn't there, and you kind of have a personal sense of his presence. Yeah,
because the story goes to me, and I still remember this. This is one of my earliest memories. I was probably 4 or 5, somewhere in the kindergarten, real early, but you can form memories and you that you hold on to. I remember sitting in my room with the window open. It was kind of springtime or something. I had my arms on the windowsill, my head on my arms, and I'm just looking out, and I'm like, "Hey God, what's up? Just wanted to let you know, like, and this is not the words I used, but essentially I was saying, we're cool, right? Like, I'll do what you want. Like, I trust you. Like, it was me,
Wow.
and without formally, making a commitment, it was me making a commitment. And
yeah.
So then, and I consider that like the moment. People would say that was your conversion moment. I think that was it, even though later on, in a year or two later, probably, I went to a roller skating party from the church, and I remember they did the whole altar call thing, and I was like, you know what? I'm not sure if I don't know where I stand. Like, I guess I think I already did, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I was just like, what's the harm in confirming
Right.
it? And so that's what so I did it then too. And my dad was like, hey, I heard that you did that tonight. He was like, cool, that was cool. And like, then he talked to me about that. So twice, those are the two times. And then of course there was like getting actual serious about being a disciple.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about that
high school area. So that's way later though.
Well, absolutely. So one of the things I hear, I just love that picture of you sitting at the window and talking to God as a young child. I'm just imagining how pleased God was with that, right? Like I think he really loves those moments. Like it literally is the faith of a child, right? You have a child who just trusts him. And so, we have our kind of conventions, the way that we go about, bringing people in like you did later. But I think that's all we need, right? Those moments with him to know him. Okay, so later on, it sounds like probably it became your own. Like you sort of started to wrestle with your faith a little bit in a more, I want to say serious, that maybe is not the right word, but you know what I mean, way later as a high schooler.
Yeah, taking ownership of
that's
myself. It's my own. It's not somebody else's. I mean, I think I already kind of owned it, but that was me kind of making a firm commitment.
Yeah.
There was a couple of factors that between being a young kid and being mischievous when it was, I was the oldest of three boys. We're all 2 years apart. So we made it real hard on our parents. We didn't have the greatest home life though, regardless of growing up in a Christian home. We didn't have the greatest home life. My dad, who has passed now for a while, he wasn't the greatest dad. I look back and I'm like, I look back now and I'm like, man, that was something we got through. But I wish he was still here.
Yeah,
that's more so now than ever. But he, I don't know. He had an independent business. He was a hardwood floor restoration, as well as like other things like that, and carpet cleaning, and any of that kind of stuff. And so he would do that, and he would do the carpets and some of the hardwood floors at the church that we went to. They had a Christian school at that school or at that church, and so I got in for free. My brother got in for free up through. I went there from kindergarten through third grade. My brother till first grade. And then my youngest brother never did, because once it was going to be three kids, it was going to, we were going to start paying a little bit because it wasn't going to cover, what he was doing wasn't going to cover it all. And so then I went into the public school system in fourth grade on. But then the other key factor there was then when I was in eighth grade, my second youngest brother was in sixth grade. That summer, he'd been complaining of lots of headaches, been throwing up occasionally. Come to find out, around Thanksgiving of that year, he was diagnosed. He had a brain tumor.
Oh, wow.
And so they operated on him, got it all, but he was in a coma for like 6 months, which was real hard on our family.
Oh, yeah.
And then after that point, like, he came out of it, fully conscious, can function. He's all there. But he's legally blind, though he can like be 10 feet away from me and be looking at me and can tell I'm who I am, vision wise, but he can never drive. And, so it left, and his equilibrium's a little bit off. So he uses a wheelchair, but he can also walk, grabbing onto different things. And so that changed our lives drastically. And, that's one of those things where it's just like, that was that. So not having the greatest home life and then that being added on into it, a lot of questioning, a
Yeah.
lot of, I don't understand. But for me, it's not the, are you there? It's the, I don't understand why, but I trust that you still can do good out of this. And honestly, part of me being reinforced in that is that my brother, who it happened to later on, also had those same thoughts and feelings of God allowed this to happen for a reason. I don't know why, but that doesn't mean it's, he's negative towards me. He still loves me. So.
Yeah. Well, obviously that's going to raise some questions. Certainly we all face those kinds of, well, not certainly like that, but when we face those kind of moments, we have, the opportunity to question and wonder what God's doing. So even if we don't question his existence, but that shapes us then in a certain way, right? It changes the way we trust maybe, or the way that we experience. Did you have any kind of, sounds like you eventually came to a place of trust. Did you have a season of wrestling, or what was that?
It's I've kind of gone back through that, and it's not necessarily that there was ever a wrestling with, I was a huge sci-fi person. I still am. And I just kind of put it in terms of, okay, there's this, as if I'm going to go cold, hard, just entity in the universe that made everything, there was a reason for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's basically, do I trust that he is who he says he is? And if he says he is who he is, then he is looking out for me. And so I just can't understand not only why is this happening to me, because it's happening really more to my brother.
Yeah.
Do I trust that he is who he says he is?
Right.
And I just said, I have no reason, even in this, to say no. So I went with yes, and I've gone with yes ever since. And so and so then the question doesn't become, does he care? It's more, how much am I going to beat my head against the wall trying to figure out what it is he is doing, or can I be patient?
Right.
And and again, skipping ahead years later, being a parent myself, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty much what I think it's been like for him on a massive scale.
Oh yeah.
The other way around.
Isn't it funny how parenthood teaches you that? Like it's a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, I love those moments when kids like make up something to fill in gaps that they don't get, right? And they go, oh, well, whatever. I can't come up with a funny example, but like they fill in those gaps, and then you're like, where did you get, that we eat peanut butter because we don't like almonds or whatever it is, right? And it's something silly. And you're like, oh, okay. And I wonder how often we do that with God, certainly. And then I also think kind of science as well. That's that's an aside.
Yeah. So there's a whole lot of, and again, like I said, science fiction, and even or fantasy. Like this is where C.S. Lewis comes in for sure, where his characterization of Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia specifically, all through the series, where you see that Aslan's on a whole other level.
Yeah.
All throughout. And it's just like, but you never get the sense that he's malevolent. He's always benevolent. He's always good. And he's good even throughout when bad things are happening. And so I take it from there. And I just kind of go with, and I don't just kind of go with, I go with that. That's what's happening in real life. And I just can't understand it because I'm not him.
Right.
So,
yeah. That's interesting. So, I think you said, kind of high school years, you were kind of going through that. What?
So long story short, there was a nerdy kid at school. He, in junior high, I started hanging out with him because, he had computer games in the library during that time and during lunch. And I hated going into the lunchroom because I was a nerd too. And so it's just like, let's get out of here. And I would go play games with him. Eventually, at some point in junior high, so he transferred over into high school. We still kept in touch. He lived only a couple blocks from me or whatever. He was going to a church and he said, hey, we're having an overnight this night. We're going to play video games and eat pizza and stuff all night. I said, sounds fun. I'll come. And then that was my first time going to that youth group. And then I think I went a couple of more times at different points. And I had already been part of the youth group a little bit at the older church, but they were farther away. Like it was a 20-minute drive, and I didn't have a car. I was like in junior high and low high school, so I started to think, well, this one's way closer, and I'm starting to get to know people there. They seem to really like me, whereas the other place it wasn't so much the case, and they didn't dislike me actively or anything. It was just I felt like, hey, I'm not connecting here, and so I started going there, and soon enough, like it was freshman year of high school, summer of that year into sophomore year of high school, and I just became part of it. Like I was a member of the youth group. It was, you know, I came because of one person, and then stayed.
Yeah,
and stayed all throughout sophomore, junior, senior days of high school, and even connected with them and kind of connected with that denomination. And they have university. More than one university, in fact, of that denomination. I mean, it's non-denominational school, but that's where I went, was Indiana Wesleyan University here.
Okay.
I still live here in Marion, Indiana, where it is.
Oh, nice.
I used to work there too for a long time. So,
like after
point there, getting in touch with that youth group, that spun my whole life in this direction.
Yeah, interesting. So in the Wesleyan direction?
Yes.
Or like okay.
Yeah, not just the Wesleyan direction, but I guess in that direction, and how it basically, I connected with that youth group, which then connected me with, friends and girlfriends, and then that college, and then from that college to this physical location in life. I mean, this has now been, since that point of coming out here for college, that's been the second half of my life now.
Oh yeah, very interesting.
So,
okay, so it's kind of between Indianapolis and Fort Wayne. I've been around.
Yeah.
Cool. So, well, interesting. So what did that do for you? I mean, obviously community is super important as a high schooler, right? You just need to have people but did they kind of spur you on? Did that spur you on in your faith? Did somebody disciple you or what? Yeah.
Yeah. There was no concept of accountability or real, just consistent discipleship up until this point. This was a point where, they were all about, consistency, meeting corporately, as well as doing your own stuff on your own, spiritual disciplines with prayer and Bible study and devotions and all of that. And so, and not only that, but collectively going, like I was going there on Sunday mornings then.
Yeah.
Sunday mornings to church and to Sunday school, as well as.
Did your family go?
Well, see, that was the thing, is they didn't. But at that point in time, people weren't. People had kind of faded in my family. That is, they'd kind of faded out from going really anywhere that consistently. But it was a thing where I do remember this now. My dad, over time, I think he went the other end of the spectrum than I did when it came to my brother's condition. He was like, yeah. I don't know. I think in a lot of ways, even though our old church reached out and gave a lot of food and a lot of cooked meals and everything during that time, he still felt like maybe the church and or God let him down, or let us down during that time, which I don't know where he would come up with that. But at the same time, he struggled with depression. I am sure of it, looking back on it.
Sure.
And let's see. So he wasn't going at all. My brother was in the hospital. My younger brother wasn't really much part of it. So my mom and I would go sometimes. She was very much part of it. But I think at some point I had to have the conversation where I was like, I'm in this youth group now. I think I want to go to that church. And so are we cool with that? And gradually over time, and I mean, eventually, like my brother, who would go, he would attend, he would go in the wheelchair. My dad, not really. My younger brother, not really. But my mom, my brother, and I, we would go together.
Yeah.
But for a long time, it was my friend, that nerdy kid, his family would pick me up.
Gotcha.
Go to church.
Yeah. Which I think speaks to how powerful that can be, right? Just be a friend. Sometimes that'll make the whole difference.
Yeah. It's a huge deal. And so I think the other key piece then for me was not only all of the, consistency, accountability, spiritual disciplines, but it was the community, because suddenly I had all these friends that they were just like, they didn't hesitate. It was really strange looking back on it. Like, and I'm talking about, like, I met these guys and girls for that matter. I met them, in, basically going into my sophomore year of of high school. And a lot of them were college friends too.
Wow.
And it was that it was that first kind of real feeling of, this is what church is supposed to be. This is community. This is living life together. This is being there for each other. This is bearing each other's burdens. This is being helpful and supportive to each other. And of course, in the beginning, all that really takes the form of is being nice to each other.
Right.
And
yeah. Not picking on each other. Right.
Yeah. And maybe goes to the next step, which is being interested in people that you don't know yet. And so they were very friendly. And even the youth pastor, like he had his cheesy moments over the years.
They all do.
Like, he still genuinely cared, and I will never not appreciate that.
I love that. Yeah, I think mentors are so important like that too, right? People who just care about you and where you are and invest in you. Okay, so did that take your faith deeper? Were there other events that you can see where you maybe had seasons when Scripture was really important to you, or disciplines? Sounds like you probably got into some of that. Like, how did that begin to develop in your life?
Yeah, I mean, again, one of the biggest pieces for me was I had kind of, at some point there, I'd taken real ownership of it in late junior high, early high school, and that was even still kind of before I joined that other youth group. But once I did, I kind of once it clicked, and it was like, these are my people. I dove right in. Like, I was like, wait, we do this? Wait, you guys do this? Oh, okay, cool. So there was like Scripture Bible quiz stuff that they would do.
Yeah.
There was also this youth group had a thing that I now realize is very unique, which was they had a thing where they would practice like a dramatic kind of long form skit presentation / interspersed with music numbers that they would do, and they would rehearse that on Saturday mornings throughout the fall. And then in the spring, they would travel around New York State to other Wesleyan churches, and even some that weren't, and would be the performance or the service substitute on certain Sunday mornings or even Sunday evenings. And that whole kind of touring that thing and being part of that musical thing really changed things, because it was like one part boot camp, one part band on the road.
Yeah.
And living life on the road. It was like, but it was just the weekend. It was like, sometimes it was we'd leave on a Friday or we'd leave on a Saturday and stay overnight at some place. We'd all stay. I mean, members of the churches would, like, on a Saturday night, stay at their house. We'd split into different groups, and so it was always like, well, I'm with this and this person, or I'm with this and this guy. Different groups of people. Then staying in those families' homes, talking with them, getting to know them. I mean, it was really a big deal, and it's pretty eye opening and different, and nothing I expected to ever happen. And then there would be summer camp, mountaintop moments, and retreats. And
are there any of those that stand out to you that were especially formative?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, doing Bible quizzing was one of the biggest things, because I didn't realize how much memorizing it was. I guess I didn't realize how much memorization was possible. That's definitely something I've gotten away from over time. But I also do, like, remember a lot. Like, I have a pretty close to photographic memory, and I can see things.
Wow.
It's about how quickly I can pull it up or pull it out, and how blurry or not I can see it in my head, but I can.
Oh, that's cool. You remember it in the version that you learned it into?
A lot of it was NIV, and we did one year, which was Matthew. Another year, I think, was John. Trying to I don't think I did it all 3 years that year. I think it was the last 2 years that I did it. So
yeah,
but that was a big deal to just be immersed in that,
right?
Be on that team,
right? And that will shape you, right? That's deeply when you have the Scripture in your heart. Yeah, interesting. Okay, have you ever had a time when you felt like God was far away, or when you actually Like maybe you went through a spiritually dry season or a time when sometimes called the spiritual desert or the wall.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I think my wife would describe it the same way, where I think we both had such high expectations and maybe some unrealistic expectations of what marriage was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so during the first year to 2 years, especially, I think we both, I think we've talked about this, but I think we both got hit hard with, oh, you mean it's not just about them like being all perfect for me. It's about me taking my own responsibility of my, like, it was almost like we both kind of like said, yeah, we got this other person. Now I don't need to do anything, as absurd as that sounds.
Yeah.
And yet that's a lot of, the friction there. And so that would probably be where that would fall into for sure. And even sometimes, past that point where, for example, like when my first kid, my daughter was born, she was born 10 weeks early.
Oh, wow.
Like, we weren't ready for this. And then she was super early. And then it was, my wife was down in Indianapolis, an hour away, while my daughter was in the ICU, or the NICU, I should say. And she was staying at the Ronald McDonald House, and I had to work. And so I'd go down there once every couple of days and then go down for the weekend for a good month and a half, something like that. And then she came home. She was born at the first week of January, and then she came home Valentine's Day. So about 6 weeks, I guess. So that those two kind of pieces there were kind of, ugh.
Yeah, that'll definitely shake you, right? And you wonder, like, what's going on? Where, you're supposed to fix this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's like, what? Why me? And or, and that's just, those are kind of outside things. Although the first one wasn't. That was still very much, oh, I need to own this. My expectations were off. I was looking at this the wrong way. And that's been, in any subsequent time that's happened, it's always been, I have not been paying attention, or I've been lax, or let things slide myself. And then suddenly I look up and I'm like, wait, where am I? And it's not his fault. It's mine.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always it's often the case. I think, it's a pretty common experience to have seasons where you feel like, hey, God's either not there, or, you're kind of questioning what he's doing. In fact, scripture's full of that, throughout. But coming back to, hey, he's still good. Sounds like you were able to do that. Interesting. How did you get into productivity?
That is a great question. So that was also something that kind of, was in my head in high school. It was very much because I was a horrible student. I hated it. And looking back on it, it was one part lack of figuring out the system, one part having ADHD diagnosed later as an adult, which I just didn't know. And then 2 or 3, see, there you go. 3, just not liking the system or the setup of how education works, the way it public schools do it. And again, I don't place blame. I take ownership of saying, oh, once it clicked that I could learn or have interest in certain subjects and I could excel in that subject, which happened in English classes and sometimes history classes. And I would ask, well, why does that click? That would help. I would be able to figure that out and kind of figure out what it is about it that's making it work. So it was the problem, the puzzle to solve, the story to figure out. And so that's kind of where that came from. But I didn't know I didn't know there was no word productivity in my life, not until again past college. Like all throughout that time, it was always just a struggle. But I knew that like it was a system, it was a getting on top of things, it was figuring out your time, it was figuring out your calendar. Late in college, when I was excelling finally and able to, continually pass classes, have interest in them, became a communications major, hence do it, knowing how to, I mean, the technology wasn't there just yet to do podcasts or even edit video or any of that, but I was messing around in some of it. But I was, once it clicked, communication, this is fun. I enjoy doing this, and I enjoy hanging out with these people, and it's this topic that's working. That's what finally I was able to say, okay, well, then how do I stay ahead of myself? It's honestly, it's the same skills that I'm struggling with right now with my daughter in her home.
Right.
Helping her figure that out. But once I was able to click that in college, but jumping ahead years later to where we've got a kid and I am working a full-time job and I'm in a cubicle.
Yeah.
Hating it.
Oh.
I'm doing data entry and I'm answering phones and I'm doing that at the first level that I was at in that cubicle. Then I moved up and I'm in sales to a certain extent in admissions there at the university. And I'm quote outselling everybody else in my department. It's like, so where the person right behind me, second level behind me, number 2 in the office, has half of what I have.
Wow.
I'm definitely doing something right.
Yeah.
So, and I wasn't even like half the time I was sitting there bored in my cubicle, but I'm still, I'm performing here. And yet I'm still feeling like I'm lazy sitting there. So,
and that was because you had a system probably to make it work.
So having figured that out and having gotten into it, that's where I knew it was a thing. And I started to work on it, have it be part of my routine where I was like, hey, I just had my routine where first thing I come in the morning, I do this, 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 and this in this order. And I'd be done with it before 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And so I've got 2 more hours till lunch, come back from lunch, do it again. And then the rest of the day. And it's just like, I wish that I'd been like sitting there blogging or even just writing personally.
I know, right?
Or something. But I honestly surf the web so much. I was sitting there waiting for phone calls or replying to emails as they would come in. So
I did that too. That's why I ended up getting the online stuff, right? Because I was for a long time I was reading blogs, and then I switched to a job where I actually had to work, and so I was bouncing people's checks, and I couldn't I was clicking things I couldn't read, so I switched to podcasts, and that's how I found podcasting.
Well, and that's where I found podcasts as well. That's when in 2005, June or July, I forget which. It's one of those. iTunes added podcasts to the sidebar, and I was like, "There's an iTunes update. Cool." Click. Coffee break, went up, used the bathroom, came back, got coffee, sat down. What's this podcast thing? Started clicking in it and figuring out what they were and listening to it. And I'm like, oh, this is amazing. I can sit here and listen to radio shows on my own time. This is awesome.
I know.
And instantly loved it. Have loved it ever since. It was going to be a while, like 2 years before I did one with a friend. Then we did that for about a year, and then we stopped, and then we did it again for another year. And then I got in connection with some of the other people that I'd been in connection with, like Cliff Ravenscraft and others.
Yeah.
That's how I started to get known.
Yeah.
Started to get known on the internet through that. So
yeah, Cliff was on the show a couple times last year. That was pretty cool. A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the question I want to ask. Are you ever tempted to take the productivity idea and apply it to your faith?
I don't see them as dissimilar.
Interesting.
I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I see part of productivity is discipline. Part of being a disciple is discipline. It's right there in the word, disciple, discipline. It's following. And I have over time, I've learned so much about different productivity aspects. Like, for example, how it's not all about productivity in terms of producing, which is part of the word productivity, but it's also about not producing. It's also about rest, which we know is take that and say, okay, well, one of the most productive things you can do each week is take a Sabbath.
Right.
So they're not, and I guess that's just the natural progression there. I mean, that's the way I see my faith is like, look, God made life. And so there's times to be busy. There's times to be optimized. There's, it's in other words, well, here's the secret. In order to be I'm blanking on the address in the scripture, and I bet I could find it. In fact, let me Google it while I talk.
Okay.
Because I know I'll be able to find it. See, this is one of those things.
If you start, I might know where it is.
I have pieces of it. I'll know it in a second. So basically, it's 1 Corinthians 10, 31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all to the glory of God. So why would you not want to, whatever you're doing, optimize it to the best of its ability? Because if you're doing anything you're doing to the glory of God, you don't want to do it as if it's shoddy work.
Right.
And that includes the work of living life. And so, and that's I don't see productivity as just a work thing. I look at it as a life thing.
Oh, that's very good. I think sometimes it's tempting. So this is, and maybe this is just my story, but for a long time, I was interested in discipleship, right? And then that kind of led into spiritual disciplines. But the struggle with spiritual disciplines is it can become very legalistic very quickly, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, oh, I got to do this thing. And if I do that, then I'm right with God. And that's just not the case. So for me, Dallas Willard, he had wrote a book called The Spirit of the Disciplines that just like sort of cuts that off at the knees. But it was really helpful to me. So that's why I was kind of interested in that idea, because I could see, I wonder if you wrestled with it, but I could see where it might be tempting to go, well, I'm going to apply these things and do these things, and maybe that'll make up your faith, or do something. Well,
let me answer that with this. You can be legalistic about productivity as well, to where you do it for the practice of doing it and you lose the essence of it. I mean, there's all about that in, the spirit of the law versus the law itself.
Right.
It's something that's often talked about, and the legalism there. And so, I don't want to be a Pharisee, a productivity Pharisee. So
right.
I can apply that. You get what I'm saying.
All right. Now I've got the title for this episode. Don't be a productivity Pharisee. That's very good. Anyway, very cool. Well, that's interesting. What has, I know for a lot of us, finding kind of the online space and our online businesses give us a voice, right? Help us find ourselves. How has that done that for you?
Yeah. That's been interesting, and there's one of the things where it's like, again, speaking of the legalism, or speaking of however you want to call it, my approach has always been, I am not a person who is, quote, evangelistic. I am not a person who, in every interaction I have with somebody, I need to try and preach at them. I just feel, I personally feel that's wrong. There are people who would disagree with me. And in fact, that's been that's been my experience, is I've always been, quote, too religious for some and not religious enough for others.
That's interesting.
I kind of fit in that middle zone. So I would rather be, if I can, and this is what I try to do, I would rather be Jesus to every single person I have come in contact with. And I think at least I'd hope, but I think that that's been the case. Yeah. Where if I'm a jerk, like, crap, I realize it later, and I apologize. So it's not that I'm perfect, but it's that that has been the approach.
What I was curious about is just how you've kind of discovered who you are, and how, maybe that relates to, certainly your work, but also your faith, because God made us each to do certain things. And so you're doing that.
I actually can think of about 3 different things that I want to bring up in regards to this. So if I really think about it, we're in 2020 right now. Since about 2007, 5, 6, 7. So maybe like 15 years, I feel like.
Wow.
Kind of an online life. It's about how you carry yourself. It's about how you're known, or what you're known for, but not just as, like, quote, an expert, but as, like, a person. It's about that dichotomy of how are you perceived, and who are you perceived as, and what's your character, in other words. Does what you present yourself as match who you are? Is who you say you are who you really are? That's been a struggle. That is, especially as somebody who is having conversations with people and then gets labeled as a productivity expert. It's like, well, am I? You know what? No. I would still claim it in some senses. No. Yes and no. I would say I know a lot, but I always am learning and studying, and I definitely screw it up. But I would say, hopefully, in the most important places, I'm still me, and I'm admittedly fallible and not filled with an ego, or any of those kinds of things. Because that's one of the other things that kind of comes along in the online space is whatever the thing it is that you're doing, you've got to market it and get it out there. Well, it's like, yeah, but how far is too far? Like,
right.
There's marketing to a point, and then there's when you go beyond that and you're like, I'm the greatest, and you start to believe your own press.
Right. Right.
So there's that. The thing that I think helps me though, stay humble in some ways is I've had a lot of people send messages. When I say a lot, I don't want to make that sound like, oh my gosh, I get like so many emails of all the, I sound like some inflated ego people when I say that. But the times that I've gotten messages from people who've been thankful for something I've put out there, whether it's been a productivity tool or a tip or a trick or a podcast episode, all of the above, and they've been thankful and they've said thank you, that's humbling. And it's been, it just shows you never know how many lurkers there are listening or watching that see what you do, and it reinforces and or is a small part, much like my nerdy friend back in junior high who pivot pointed my life without knowing he was at the time.
Yeah.
Without me knowing, I might be that pivot point for somebody else.
Isn't that powerful? I love that. That is one of my favorite things. Certainly with podcasting, as you know, you can reach all over the world. Everywhere.
I've seen the stats.
Yeah, right. It's all over the world, and people, you never know how you're going to influence someone, and it's amazing. Wow. All right, Erik, I don't want to keep you too long. Thank you so much for being here. Friends, you can find Erik at beyondthetodolist.com. I've got links to that and Erik's Twitter there, which is where he likes to hang out. So, Erik, is there anything you want to leave us with?
Not necessarily. Just, I think I'm thankful for anybody who has listened to this and maybe found some sort of connection to my story in their own. I'm glad to have shared it. So thanks for listening.
Well, thanks for sharing it. I really appreciate it. I'll tell you what, I tell everybody that you're one of the people I used to listen to when I met you at Podcast Movement. And I was like, oh, I know who that is. And we were talking, and you said, hey, I'd love to do that. I thought, wow, that's it meant a lot to me. So I really appreciate you coming and just sharing a little bit of your story.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been fun.